tremendous amount of pride we had from the writing staff, people like Reggie Rock Bythewood, Jamal Joseph, Judy McCreary, wardrobe Richie Owens, to locations, to Steve McBride, other folks. We understood the assignment. We have to put the culture forward in the most authentic way possible.
Television has always held on to stories that feel bigger than what we see on screen. Back in the 1990s, New York Undercover stood out as something raw and different, but there was always a sense that more was happening behind the scenes. Over time, small details and hidden truths have started to come out, catching even longtime fans off guard. It is the kind of story people thought they already understood until new voices began to speak. What did the cast finally reveal that fans never figured out? Join us as we uncover what really happened behind New York Undercover, the show that changed everything. On September 8, 1994, Fox premiered a cop drama called New York Undercover, starring Malik Yoba as Detective J.C. Williams and Michael DeLorenzo as Detective Eddie Torres.
If there's a chance that that kid is telling the truth, we should be investigating. You know what? The case is closed, the DA's gonna file, end of story.
It doesn't sound revolutionary until you realize what made it different. Williams was black, Torres was Puerto Rican, and for the first time in the history of American primetime television, two people of color were starring together in a police drama as the leads. The show became an instant hit with audiences who'd been waiting decades to see themselves represented on screen in roles that weren't stereotypes or tokens. But behind the cameras, tensions were building that would eventually tear the show apart and reveal uncomfortable truths about how Hollywood valued its non-white stars. New York Undercover premiered at a key moment in television history. The early 1990s had seen some progress in representation, but it was mostly incremental. Black sitcoms like The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and Living Single had found success, but dramas were different. Dramas required bigger budgets, longer production schedules, and a level of network commitment that sitcoms didn't always demand. And dramas, especially cop dramas, had traditionally been the domain of white actors playing white characters, solving crimes in predominantly white worlds. The few exceptions proved the rule. Shows like In the Heat of the Night had featured black actors in prominent roles, but usually as one half of an interracial partnership rather than as dual leads. The assumption seemed to be that audiences, particularly white audiences, wouldn't accept a cop show that centered entirely on non-white characters. New York Undercover challenged that assumption head-on, and the fact that it succeeded made its eventual unraveling even more painful. The show's creation came from a convergence of factors. Dick Wolf had established himself as a powerhouse producer with Law and Order, which had premiered in 1990 and was building toward becoming one of the longest-running shows in television history. But Wolf recognized that Law and Order's world was narrow. It depicted New York City through a very specific lens, one that focused on Manhattan courtrooms and largely white prosecutors and police. Wolf saw an opportunity to tell stories from a different part of New York to show the city that most crime dramas ignored. He partnered with Andre Harrell, the founder and CEO of Uptown Records, who brought his understanding of hip-hop culture and urban communities to the project.
So then Puff wouldn't really listen to anybody but me. So my full-time job became managing Puff.
Together, they created something that felt authentic in ways that cop shows rarely did. The show came from Dick Wolf, the producer who'd already made Law and Order a massive success on NBC. But New York Undercover was different from Law & Order in almost every way. Where Law & Order was cold and procedural, New York Undercover was warm and character-driven. Where Law & Order focused on the legal system, New York Undercover focused on the streets. And where Law & Order kept its personal stories to a minimum, New York Undercover made the personal lives of its detectives central to the show. J.C. Williams was a father raising his teenage son Gregory while dealing with his ex-girlfriend Chantal. Eddie Torres came from a troubled family, with a father who was a recovering heroin addict and a musician. The show dealt with racial profiling, gang violence, substance abuse, and all the messy realities of urban life that most cop shows avoided. What really set New York Undercover apart was the music. Almost every episode featured performances at a nightclub called Natalie's, owned by Eddie Torres's father. The club scenes showcased R&B and hip-hop artists at the peak of their popularity. Mary J. Blige, Boyz II Men, The Four Tops, The Temptations, 112, Xscape, Gerald Levert, Casey and JoJo, and dozens of others performed on the show. The music was woven into the fabric of each episode, reflecting the cultural moment and the community the show was depicting. For young Black and Latino viewers in the mid-1990s, New York Undercover wasn't just entertainment, it was validation. The chemistry between Yoba and De Lorenzo made the show work. Their partnership felt real because both actors brought authentic backgrounds to their roles. Michael De Lorenzo had grown up in the Bronx, the son of an Italian father and Puerto Rican mother. He'd trained as a dancer with Ballet Hispanico, performed with Mikhail Baryshnikov and the American Ballet Theater, and attended the High School of Performing Arts that inspired the movie and TV series Fame. He'd appeared in the original Fame movie in 1980 and the TV show from 1982 to 1987. He'd danced in Michael Jackson's Beat It video and Lionel Richie's Dancing on the Ceiling video. Before New York Undercover, he'd been a series regular on the ABC sitcom Head of the Class. De Lorenzo wasn't just an actor, he was also a vocalist, songwriter, and multi-instrumentalist who played guitar, drums, and piano. One of his songs, Don't Let Me Be Lonely Tonight, appeared on the New York Undercover soundtrack. Malik Yoba brought his own authenticity. He'd grown up in New York City and understood the streets the show was depicting. His portrayal of J.C. Williams showed a detective who was tough but vulnerable, committed to his job but struggling with the weight of trying to raise a son in a dangerous city. The relationship between Williams and Torres wasn't just professional, it was brotherhood. They had each other's backs on the streets and in their personal lives. That dynamic resonated with viewers who saw their own friendships reflected in the partnership. The supporting cast filled out the world perfectly. Patty D'Arbanville played Lieutenant Virginia Cooper, their no-nonsense boss who ran the 4th Precinct with an iron fist, but also protected her detectives.
How are you planning to prove this kid's innocent?
We want to bring the girl in for questioning.
Look, we'll use what we know. Make her talk.
Lauren Velez joined in the 2nd season as Detective Nina Moreno, who became Eddie Torres's partner and love interest. George Gore, too, played Gregory Williams, JC's son, dealing with the challenges of being a teenager with a cop for a father. The show took time to develop these characters and their relationships, making the 4th Precinct feel like a real place with real people. Fox scheduled New York Undercover on Thursday nights, alongside Living Single and Martin, creating a lineup that became appointment viewing for Black audiences. While NBC dominated Thursday nights with Friends, Seinfeld, and ER, Fox carved out its own audience with shows that spoke directly to communities that mainstream television had mostly ignored. The strategy worked. New York Undercover became one of Fox's highest-rated shows, regularly pulling in 10 to 12 million viewers. For a network that was still relatively new and fighting for relevance against the big 3 networks, those numbers were crucial. Critics praised the show for its groundbreaking representation and its willingness to tackle social issues. Michael De Lorenzo won the Alma Award for Outstanding Actor in a Drama Series in both 1996 and 1998. The show was nominated for multiple NAACP Image Awards, and perhaps most importantly, it opened doors for other shows with diverse casts. New York Undercover proved that audiences would watch a drama centered on non-white characters, that hip-hop and R&B could be integrated into mainstream television. But success brought problems that nobody anticipated. As the show's ratings climbed and its cultural impact grew, the 2 stars started asking questions about their compensation. They were headlining one of Fox's biggest hits, but they weren't being paid like stars, not even close. And when they tried to negotiate for better treatment, they ran headfirst into a system that had very different ideas about what actors of color deserved, no matter how successful their show became. The revolt no one saw coming. July 23, 1996, was supposed to be the first day of shooting for New York Undercover's 3rd season. The cast and crew arrived on set, ready to begin work. But 2 people didn't show up. Malik Yoba and Michael De Lorenzo were nowhere to be found. They hadn't called in sick. They hadn't sent word through their agents. They simply didn't appear. Production shut down immediately. Dick Wolf, the show's creator and executive producer, was furious. What nobody knew yet was that Yoba and De Lorenzo had coordinated their absence. They'd banded together and decided to hold out from filming until their demands were met. The demands weren't unreasonable by Hollywood standards, but they were significant. Both actors wanted their pay increased from $40,000 per episode to $100,000 per episode. They wanted more creative input, with De Lorenzo specifically requesting the opportunity to direct some episodes. They wanted better working conditions, including a gym on set, proper trailers for the stars, and better food. These weren't the demands of divas throwing tantrums. They were the demands of professionals who felt undervalued and wanted to be treated like the stars of a hit show. And to understand why they felt justified, you need context.
I mean, imagine living with somebody that does something that everybody hates.
Oh, like being married to a cop.
Around the same time, the cast of Friends had successfully banded together to negotiate massive pay increases. The 6 Friends actors had started at around $22,500 per episode in the first season. By the third season, they were each making $75,000 per episode, and they were negotiating as a group to push that number even higher, eventually reaching $1 million per episode by the final seasons. The Friends' strategy of collective bargaining had worked, and it had set a precedent. If 6 white actors on a sitcom could negotiate together and get massive raises, why couldn't 2 actors of color on a drama do the same? Dick Wolf saw things differently. He compared the New York Undercover situation to Friends and then drew a line. He told reporters that New York Undercover was not Friends, making it clear that he didn't think the shows were in the same league. Wolf called the demands of actors joining together to hold a show in limbo a virus in the entertainment industry. He was furious that Yoba and De Lorenzo had coordinated their holdout, viewing it as a dangerous precedent that could spread to other shows. Wolf threatened to write both actors out of New York Undercover altogether, killing off their characters and recasting the leads if they didn't return to work under their existing contracts. The day after the holdout began, Universal Television, the production company behind New York Undercover, filed a $1.2 million lawsuit against Yoba and De Lorenzo. The lawsuit claimed that the 2 actors had breached their contracts and that they were costing the show $60,000 each day they didn't show up to work. The lawsuit was designed to apply maximum pressure and force the actors back to set. The studio had power, and they were willing to use it. The standoff lasted 3 days. On July 26th, Yoba and De Lorenzo returned to work. Their demands had been completely unmet. They got no pay raise. They got no creative input. They got no gym or trailers or better food. They simply went back to work under the terms of their original contracts, with the lawsuit hanging over their heads and Dick Wolf making it clear that he'd won the confrontation. For the actors, it must have been humiliating. They'd taken a stand, and they'd lost. But the fallout was just beginning. Tensions between De Lorenzo and Wolf lingered throughout the third season. De Lorenzo had been the more vocal of the two during the holdout, and Wolf apparently didn't forget it. As the season progressed, rumors started circulating that De Lorenzo might not return for a 4th season. The aftermath of the holdout revealed deeper problems. Sources close to the production reported that the atmosphere on set changed dramatically after Yoba and De Lorenzo returned. The easy camaraderie that had characterized the first 2 seasons disappeared. De Lorenzo in particular seemed isolated, working professionally, but without the warmth that had made his on-screen partnership with Yoba so believable. Crew members noticed that Wolf stopped visiting the set as frequently, and when he did appear, interactions with De Lorenzo were minimal and formal. The third season attempted to continue as if nothing had happened. New characters were introduced, including Detective Tommy McNamara, played by Jonathan LaPaglia, who was positioned as a 3rd member of the team. Some viewers saw McNamara's addition as an attempt to dilute the show's focus on its Black and Latino leads, adding a white character who could potentially take over if Yoba or De Lorenzo caused more problems. Whether that was the intention or simply paranoid speculation from fans who sensed the show changing, the effect was the same.
It's like another character. It's just like the city. It adds a whole nother texture, and it brings the mood and the emotions to life.
New York Undercover no longer felt like the groundbreaking series it had been. The quality of the episodes remained high, at least in the first half of the season. De Lorenzo and Yoba were consummate professionals who didn't let their behind-the-scenes troubles affect their performances. Eddie Torres's character arc that season was particularly strong, developing his relationship with Nina Moreno and preparing for their marriage. but knowing how it ended colors everything that came before. Every scene where Torres talked about his future with Nina, every moment where he and JC discussed their friendship enduring through whatever came next, feels tragic in hindsight. The audience was watching a man being written toward his death, and neither they nor the actor playing him knew it was coming. Then came the Season 3 finale in May 1997. The episode was titled Without Mercy, and it would change the show forever. In the finale, Eddie Torres and Nina Moreno got married. It should have been a happy ending for the characters who'd been building toward this relationship for 2 seasons. But in the same episode, Torres and fellow detective Tommy McNamara went after a gang of bank robbers. The confrontation turned violent. Both Torres and McNamara were killed. Eddie Torres died in a car explosion, and just like that, one of the 2 leads who'd made New York Undercover groundbreaking was gone. Michael DeLorenzo was out. Fans were outraged. The friendship between J.C. Williams and Eddie Torres had been the heart of the show. Killing Torres felt like killing New York Undercover itself. Many viewers believe the show jumped the shark with Torres's death, that it never recovered from losing the dynamic that made it special. The ratings started to slide. The cultural moment that had made the show so important seemed to pass, and when the 4th season premiered in January 1998 with a completely revamped cast, it felt like a different show entirely. New York Undercover limped through one more season before Fox canceled it in February 1999, ending after 89 episodes. Looking back, the question everyone asked was why DeLorenzo got fired while Yoba stayed. Both actors had participated in the holdout equally. Both had made the same demands. Both had returned to work under the same conditions. So why did Wolf target DeLorenzo? Some speculated that DeLorenzo had been more vocal during negotiations, making him the primary target of Wolf's anger. Others suggested that DeLorenzo's specific demand to direct episodes had particularly irritated Wolf, who saw it as overreach. There were darker theories, too, whispered in industry circles, about network executives wanting to add more white characters to the show and seeing DeLorenzo's exit as an opportunity to change the racial dynamics of the cast. Whatever the reason, the message sent by DeLorenzo's firing was chilling. 2 actors of color had tried to negotiate for better pay and treatment on a show they'd made successful. The studio sued them, forced them back to work, and then punished one of them by killing his character and ending his career on the show. The lesson wasn't subtle. Know your place. Don't ask for too much. And if you do, we'll make an example of you. Exposing a system where success didn't translate to power or fair compensation if you weren't the right color. Keep watching, there's more. The truth nobody wanted to hear. The New York Undercover story would be easier to dismiss as a one-time conflict between difficult actors and a stubborn producer if it existed in isolation, but it doesn't. What happened to Malik Yoba and Michael DeLorenzo fits into a much larger pattern of how Hollywood treats actors of color.
She don't come off as a drug addict, but she's not being straight with us either.
So maybe she's holding for that kid, Jimmy.
Particularly when those actors start asking to be compensated fairly for their work. The uncomfortable truth that most fans never figured out is that New York Undercover wasn't an exception. It was the rule. Compare the New York Undercover situation to what was happening simultaneously on Friends. Both shows premiered in 1994. Both became major hits for their networks. Both featured ensemble casts that developed strong chemistry. But the trajectories of the actors' pay negotiations couldn't have been more different. The Friends cast started at $22,500 per episode and eventually negotiated their way to $1 million per episode by the final season. They used collective bargaining to increase their leverage, and the network ultimately gave them what they wanted because Friends was too valuable to lose. Yoba and DeLorenzo tried the exact same strategy. They banded together, presented unified demands, and threatened not to work unless those demands were met. But instead of negotiating in good faith, the studio sued them and threatened to fire them both. Dick Wolf explicitly compared their situation to Friends and then said New York Undercover was not Friends, as if the value of the two shows was somehow objectively different rather than being a reflection of who was starring in them. The subtext wasn't subtle. White actors on a sitcom could negotiate aggressively and get rewarded. Black and Latino actors on a drama could do the same thing and get destroyed. The pay disparity tells the story clearly. At the time of their holdout, Yoba and De Lorenzo were making $40,000 per episode and asking for $100,000. The Friends cast was already making $75,000 per episode in their third season and would soon be making much more. New York Undercover was consistently in Fox's top 10 shows, regularly pulling 10 to 12 million viewers. It was as much a hit for Fox as Friends was for NBC. But the actors weren't compensated proportionally to their show's success. They weren't even close. The economic realities of television production complicate the story, but don't excuse it. Fox was fighting for survival in the mid-1990s, competing against the established Big Three networks with a fraction of their resources. Every dollar mattered. Every negotiation had implications for other shows and other actors. If Fox gave Yoba and De Lorenzo the raises they wanted, would that create pressure to raise salaries across their entire lineup? Would other actors see it as an invitation to hold out for better deals? These were legitimate concerns that executives had to consider, but those concerns existed in a context of systemic inequity. The uncomfortable truth is that studios have always found money when they needed to keep white actors happy. The Friends cast didn't just get their raises, they got increases that dwarfed what Yoba and De Lorenzo were asking for, and the network celebrated them for it rather than suing them.
Fine. Let's find out. But we're gonna call it as we see it.
You know what? I checked the evidence locker. And that 357 of Clancy's?
The pattern repeats across Hollywood. Studios plead poverty when actors of color negotiate, then somehow find large amounts of money when white actors make similar demands. Part of the explanation is in the economics of network television. NBC was a bigger network with more resources than Fox. Sitcoms generate more syndication revenue than dramas because they're easier to rerun. Friends was a phenomenon that transcended television and became a cultural touchstone. All of those factors mattered, but they don't fully explain the disparity. What they don't explain is why the response to similar negotiating tactics was so radically different. The Friends cast got raises. Yoba and De Lorenzo got sued and threatened with termination. The pattern repeats throughout Hollywood history. Actors of color who become successful and then ask to be compensated fairly often face resistance that white actors don't encounter. They're told they're being greedy or difficult. They're reminded that they should be grateful for the opportunity. They're threatened with replacement. And if they push too hard, they're made examples of, just like Michael De Lorenzo was made an example of when Dick Wolf killed Eddie Torres. De Lorenzo's career never fully recovered from his exit from New York Undercover. He went on to star in Resurrection Boulevard on Showtime from 2000 to 2002, playing an embittered boxing champion. He continued working in television and film, but he never had another role with the profile and impact of Eddie Torres. The show that had been the first in American television history to feature two people of color as leads in a primetime drama had punished one of those leads for daring to ask for what he was worth. The irony was brutal. Malik Yoba stayed on New York Undercover for the fourth season, but the show was never the same without De Lorenzo. The new cast that replaced Torres and the other departing actors couldn't replicate the chemistry that had made the show special. Ratings declined, cultural relevance faded, and when Fox finally canceled New York Undercover in February 1999, it felt less like the end of a groundbreaking series and more like the merciful conclusion to something that had already died when Torres was killed off. Years later, both Yoba and De Lorenzo would look back on the New York Undercover experience with mixed feelings. They were proud of the show's impact and the doors it had opened. They appreciated the opportunity to play characters that reflected their communities with dignity and complexity. But they also carried the scars of how it ended, the knowledge that their attempt to be valued and compensated fairly had been crushed by a system that saw them as replaceable despite their obvious talent and the success they'd generated. In 2018, Dick Wolf and ABC announced plans to reboot New York Undercover. In February 2019, both Malik Yoba and Lauren Velez were confirmed to reprise their roles, with Yoba returning as J.C. Williams. The reboot was ordered to pilot, signaling interest in revisiting the groundbreaking series. For fans of the original show, the announcement brought back memories of what New York Undercover had meant in the 1990s and what it could have been if the behind-the-scenes conflicts hadn't torn it apart. The reboot also raised questions about whether things had changed in Hollywood. As of 2026, those questions remain unanswered, though the pilot has yet to move forward to series. What fans never figured out about New York Undercover is that the show's greatest achievement and its greatest tragedy were two sides of the same coin. It proved that a diverse cast could carry a hit drama and that urban stories told with authenticity could resonate with millions of viewers. But it also exposed how the system devalued the people who'd made that success possible. Malik Yoba and Michael DeLorenzo created something groundbreaking, and when they asked to be compensated for that achievement, they were punished for it. One lost his job, the other watched his show crumble. The legacy of New York Undercover is complicated. It opened doors and changed television. It gave a generation of viewers representation they'd never had before. It proved that diversity could drive ratings and cultural relevance. But it also showed how fragile that success could be when the people creating it weren't given power proportional to their contribution. The show that broke barriers was itself broken by a system that had very clear ideas about who deserved to be valued and who didn't. And more than 2 decades later, that system is still fighting many of the same battles, still resisting many of the same changes, still punishing actors of color who dare to ask for what they've earned. What do you think? Was New York Undercover treated unfairly behind the scenes, or was this just how Hollywood worked at the time? And if the same situation happened today, would the outcome really be any different? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the following video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.